All right, awesome. We are continuing to talk or work with the Scheduler app. The Scheduler app is an app that could help us with different design patterns and help us also see different paradigms in iOS development. We started off the Scheduler app back in Unit 2, right? Scheduler app Unit 2, we created basic table views, we reordered table views, we deleted table view cells. We revisited the Scheduler app last week or so to talk about persistence, okay? We'll revisit the Scheduler app again today to talk about custom delegation and how to communicate between different tabs, for example, right? So we're using the Scheduler app today. No promises that we're not going to see it again, but today we are using it for multiple tabs, subclassing tab bar controller. There's a lot happening there with the Scheduler app that we'll talk about today. But step number one is how can we update? How can we update an event? So far, we haven't updated any document in Documents directory. We've created, we've read, we've deleted. So today, we'll add some UI. We have the UI already, but we'll have some UI to edit an event and persist the event. So step one of revisiting our Scheduler app today will be, how do I update an existing event and persist that data? Okay? So before we even get into custom delegation, we'll first do updating of an event. Everybody? Because right now we are not doing that. So let's run our app to see the state of it. Where is it now? Because some things may be broken here. So we run our application, and we see that if you're running the correct app, you should have two tabs. One says schedule, and one says completed. As I said, we might not get to completed today, but we'll get to it tomorrow. But today, all what we want to do is update an event. Okay? Let's revisit persistence. Can we add an event? Oops, the add button does not work. Okay, let's fix that. If we see the storyboard doesn't have any sort of segue to our create event controller. Do we see that? We had a connection before. We had a connection visually. We were connecting from this add button here over to our view controller. So right now, we do not have that connection. So as we get closer to writing code for UI, we need to get more comfortable with setting up segues in code. So this was intentionally removed. So as we're going away from storyboards, we're getting closer to code. So how can I get this view controller in code? Okay, this is our step one. So for step one, currently we have some errors here. If we click on the error, or the warnings, if we click on the warning triangle here, and I zoom in, it says create event controller is unreachable. Anybody want to tell me why this is a warning here? Yes. Christian. It's a floating view controller. It doesn't have any connection. There's no physical connection from my add button over to that view controller. Right? Well, it's in space, right? It's in space, there's no connection there. Right, so it's unreachable. It tells you either you have a physical connection, like a segue, or you could have an ID. Because here it says it's unreachable because it has no entry points, right? And no identifier for runtime access. Xcode is running this, it's like, okay, I have this thing here in space. There's nothing connecting to it in code or whatever, or it doesn't have an ID. So what we're gonna do is give it an ID. We'll give it an identifier, and then that warning will go away. So let's first give it an identifier. So even if you have to, if you have to access it in code, you have to have an ID, period. There's no way to get access to this storyboard scene without having an ID. So beyond the warning, for us to access this storyboard scene in code, we must give it an ID. So let's go give it an ID. So click on the create event controller, and let's go to storyboard ID. Do we see storyboard ID here? Okay. So go ahead and copy the class name. So use the class name, copy the class name, and use the class name for the storyboard ID. Press enter. Best practice, just use the same storyboard ID as the same class name. Less issues in life. And you know exactly when you go to code what you type in. You type in the same class name. At some point, I'll show us a different way to actually get some string that is the same class name, right? But for now, this is enough here. So we have storyboard ID, and this is good. Okay. Now let's go back to our schedule list controller, and let's go, what do we have right now? We don't have no delegate here. We have only a data source. So anybody remember how to, basically we want to connect our add button. Do we have an add button here? No, we don't. We want to connect our add button in code. We don't have any add button. So let's get to our assistant editor. Open up the assistant editor. Get to your storyboard. Command click on this. Excellent. Get to our add button here. And this guy doesn't have a connection. So first, let's add a connection, an IB action here. We'll add an IB action right below our edit button pressed. Okay, this is good. Right below our edit button pressed, we'll add an action. This is not a segue. This is only an action. When the user presses on this, the action will get called. Here we could call it create. Let me open that up so we could see. Create event button pressed is good. So we call it create event button pressed. Cool. Bless you. Create event button pressed. Okay. So when the user clicks on this button, we want to present the create event controller. Let's create a function, private function, called show create event view controller. Okay, so far so good. And this will simply call that function. So in our create event button press, it will call this function. And this function will actually present the event controller. Now comes down to how do we get access to the storyboard file or the storyboard scene? How do we get access to it? Anybody remember how to get access to it here? I think we may have done it during the break, like after the break period here. Yes? Yes, so we're not going to make a new instance. The view controller has an instance already. But yes, if we were to use a different storyboard, we'll make a new instance. But in that case, we have one instance already which exists already on the view controller. We'll just use it. It's called Storyboard. Very good. Excellent. So here we will, let's type some stuff in here. We need to use the storyboard to get an instance of the create event controller. And as I said, a view controller, all view controllers has a property called storyboard. And here your project came with a main storyboard. But as Tiffany said, if you do not have, like if you have multiple storyboards, which we'll have at some point, if you have multiple storyboards, the code would be something similar to this. So like if I have a login storyboard, for example, it would be like login storyboard. I mean, you don't have to type this in. This is just illustration. It would be like login storyboard, UI storyboard, and then I would say the name of the storyboard. Hopefully we named it login, and then bundle ID will be nil. But here we have an existing storyboard. We'll use it. So we'll say guard let What are we expecting back? We're expecting the what? No, the bundle thing was for illustration. Don't type it out.
I know. I'm not putting it in. I'm just saying, what would it be?
The nil? The bundle? It would just be nil. So here we have create event controller. And as Tiffany said, we'll just use the storyboard instance. So we'll use the storyboard instance. On the storyboard instance, we have this function called instantiate, which we used before. Instantiate view controller with identifier. I'm really eager to show us the new way to inject into a storyboard, which is one of the biggest, I guess, achievements for UIKit last year, but I'll show it later. But there's like a new way to inject into a storyboard, which you couldn't do before. But I'll talk about that more when we start talking more about dependency injection in code. I'll also show us how to do it in Storyboard. But for now, we'll use instantiate view controller with identifier. And the identifier you put in here is the name of the view controller that we put in. Create event controller. Let's get some more space on screen. Are we done? What else we need to do here? As, right? I need to typecast it, correct? I need to typecast it to the type we expect. Because if I do not typecast it, I get back a UI view controller, right? So here, this is good. I just put a fatal error here. Here you could put a fatal error, right? But if a user doesn't put in their password or whatever, don't put a fatal error there, right? But in that case, this is a developer error. I put a fatal error there to fix what's wrong. But if a user forgets to put a password or whatever, you don't put fatal error there. You give them an alert. Everybody with me? Okay, so here fatal error could not downcast to create. And do me a favor, please just copy paste the create event controller name and paste it in here. I want to make sure that we all have the same string. Okay, in that case, we do have the create event controller on line 113, right? Yes. Exactly, exactly. But as I said, like as we get closer to writing code, we need to know more code, how to get things, right? So right now, one of the reasons is to make that view controller itself not exactly connect to the add button, because we could use it for edit as well. We'll be using it for edit as well, not only add. Okay, so it becomes more flexible. Tiffany? Which one? Create event. Yeah, that's in our project. It's a view controller, this guy, the one that has the date picker.
Right, would we make the function to return a view controller in order to use it, or how do we get rid of this yellow one?
Oh, we're not done. We're not using it yet. Okay. The yellow one, it means we haven't used the constant. Right. We're using it and we'll say present view controller. Very good. All right, which we'll just do now. So Tiffany's question was, how do we get rid of the yellow warning? Let's do that now by actually using it. So we'll say present, and what are we presenting? The create event controller, no completion. And now our warning is gone. And this is lowercase, Xcode, thank you very much. Yes, sir? You got an error. What's the error say? You have storyboard question mark here, or you have storyboard all lowercase? Build? All right, cool. So what we just did there is we got an instance of the exact storyboard scene, okay? As I said in the past, if you do something like this, create event controller, for example, If you say create event controller, those are two different things. Those are two different things. If you're like, oh, let me just get an instance by creating this instance. What you just did there is you created a new instance of a create event controller. It doesn't have a date picker. It doesn't have a create event button, right? It doesn't have anything the storyboard file has. Everybody with me? This here is a brand new create event controller without anything. I'll see this, right? But know that if your app, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
My question is, why is that if there's a process mentioned as the evidence?
Because this here says create some empty UI view controller. It doesn't say, oh, get this instance from an existing thing. When you start doing code or writing view controllers in code, you would have something like that. It would probably have some sort of variables or not variable, arguments in there in the initializer. But this initializer says create an empty view controller. The syntax here, open parens, close parens, create a new thing, an empty new thing.
So, I don't know, Luba had sort of like was doing this
Uh-huh,
yesterday,
uh-huh.
and if you create an instance, so let's say if you're trying to segue that view controller, like creating an instance, if you try to present it like that, it'll say like all of your items are nil, because you're trying to segue like an instance of something that has nothing in it. Like if you're trying to segue to a detailed view controller that's already existing, then you want to downcast it, you want to grab the instantiate it with the downcast of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because as Aaron is saying, this has no idea there's IB outlets or IB actions or whatever. It's empty, completely nothing in there. Open parens, close parens says empty view controller, nothing in there, right? So there's no outlets or anything. So if you try to segue to that, it will crash your outlets saying they're nil. Everybody? Right? So if that happens with nil, quickly, oh, am I getting if you want to get an instance from Storyboard, use instantiate view controller with the identifier, right?
What is the benefit of like presenting as opposed to like doing navigation?
This one, we want to present it because we just want to slide it up. With design or UX, if you try to push something to edit, it feels a bit weird, right, on a UX perspective, as opposed to presenting it, sliding it up. Okay, very good. Okay, so take this line out and know this. Actually, I'll keep that line here for us, and then this creates an empty view controller. Empty creates an empty.
What is the project you're doing?
The add button. That's the one thing we're working on right now, the add button.
Right, but once you make an event, shouldn't that work and shouldn't that copy the same?
We'll come to that. You miles away. We're getting there. We're getting to you. You're ahead of us right now. Creates an empty view controller without any outlets, etc. Okay? And most importantly, will crash if you are expecting your outlets to work. If they exist in the storyboard. Okay? So long story short, you want to get an instance from your storyboard, or you want to get a view controller from your storyboard, you use instantiate view controller, or the newer API, which we haven't spoken about, but we will talk about at some point, is how do you instantiate a view controller with objects. For example, I want to pass a book, or I want to pass an event, like dependency injection. This here is somewhat dependency injection, right? I could inject, which we'll do later. We'll inject an event. When we update it, we'll inject an event. So that's like dependency injection here. So later, we'll inject to do, like we always been doing here. So we will inject for updating, an event, we will inject the selected event. And here, I'll put quotes dependency injection. Dependency injection is a term that's used to say, hey, if something depends on something, you inject it by saying, for example, create event controller needs an event. So I pass it an event. So that's like dependency injection. But true dependency injection, in my opinion here, is you would have an initializer, right? So there's no way to create an event controller without this initializer. So this is like true dependency injection, but this is also injecting. You're injecting the create event controller with an event, right? It needs an event in that case, okay?
So the initial part is basically our control.
Yeah, exactly. Like that part here is code perfectly. Where it's a good tangent, right? Because as we get into programmable UI, some people will be like, oh my God, I hate storyboards, right? But I really want to advocate that you should love both. You should be able to work with both. You should be able to be comfortable working with both. You should be able to use a storyboard file and also have code, right? Your designer might want to see a storyboard file easier, quicker than seeing code. Visually, that designer just wants to see what the thing looks like, right? So being like, oh, I love code, I don't want to write any more storyboards, yuck. Or I love storyboards, I don't want to touch code, right? We programmers, we have to be able to touch both of them and be comfortable with both of them. Okay, great. So now we have comments here to come back to later. So we present our controller. It's a new controller, new event, so we're not passing any event. But when we update in, we'll use dependency injection or injecting our event in. Okay, so let's run it. Are we calling it? We're calling it here. We should be good. Let's go test it. Run it. Run as fast as you can. Click on my add button. Voila, it presents my controller like before. Okay. Yes, we wrote 5 lines of code and we had 1 drag earlier, right? But knowing the why will be more apparent later, meaning we could have that same controller. We'll use it for adding a new event, and we'll use it for passing an existing event. Everybody with me? I'm not going to create a brand new controller to say, oh, I need a edit controller now. I'll call edit controller, and I'll just copy the same storyboard. No, we're not going to do that. We'll use the same storyboard. If it's new, we'll have a state. We have a state already in our model. It's called event state. If it's new, event here, click on the event model. So if it's a new event, we have an enum to know what state it is. If it's a new event, case new event. If it's an existing event, the controller will know it's an existing event. Okay? So enums, enumerations, is the perfect way to keep state. So the view controller will always know what state it is. Am I editing a new thing or am I creating a new thing? Right? Okay. Unknown class. Okay. All right, great. So let's see if our create event still works as before. So let's try to create an event. What's today? Thursday? I'll just put lab time here. Let's test persistence, see if it still works. So lab time, I'll put 2 o'clock here. I'll put 2 p.m. I'll click return, create event. So that works, but does persistence still work? So let's see. I'll stop my app. I'll run the app again. It still persists. So verify, make sure it still works. What if we add some random event and return, create? If I delete it, does that persist? Stop, run again. Okay, so deletion still works, load works, create works. Okay?
Do we have to press like enter?
Enter. Make sure your keyboard is visible when you're creating the new event because it expects the return key. No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so next step, we want to update. So we want to update this, for example, lab time. I want to probably change lab time to something else, right? I want to be able to update that event. So first we need the UI for it. I want when I click on it, it presents the same UI, but in that case, it doesn't present an empty text field. It presents a text field with the name lab time in there, and it presents the date as the date in the date picker. So everything is as if I'm just editing the thing, like I would expect it to be. Yes?
Do you mean like you were entering it? It should appear
Yeah. So the user has a chance to just edit.
Okay.
Yeah?
They're editing in the form of text.
So the same UI that we have here, that's the same UI they'll have. But instead of having like an empty create event, it would have the event name, it would have the date, and then the button would have to be something else. As opposed to create event, it would probably be update event or something else. Yeah, something like that. All right, so let's get to that, and let's see what we want to do here. Okay, so what we want to do is, where's a good place to, we won't do what we did on Tuesday, because Tuesday was more involved. Tuesday we had a custom cell, right? Remember? We had a custom cell where we had to long press on the custom cell. But now I simply want to, when I click on the cell, or when I select the cell, just make the view appear, right? How can I do that? Or where should I start? Any hints, any?
You can use the index row for the array events.
Okay, that's the way to get the event, but what function am I implementing? Like, what happens is the user clicks on lab time, and then the view appears. Did select, very good. It's thinking like a protocol writer there. So Amini says there's a did select, or isn't there a did select? Like there should be some sort of did select on the protocol for delegate, right? So UI table view cell, or UI table view delegate does have a function called did select row at, which is exactly what we'll be using. Yeah, we'll do whatever segue we want to do in there, exactly. So let's go ahead and implement. I don't think we have a delegate protocol yet. Okay, let's go ahead in our view did load. As Amini says, let's go ahead and conform to the UI table view delegate. Okay, you build, cannot assign, because we need to go ahead and conform to the protocol. So we'll go right below our data source. Let's go below our data source here. Right below our data source. And add an extension on our schedule list controller. Conforms to UI table view delegate. And we're implementing the did select row at function. That function gets called when the user clicks on the cell. I select a cell, I put my finger down on that cell, that function gets called. It's a protocol function. We wrote our first protocol function 2 days ago. Very similar to this. We wrote some function did long press, right? Very similar here. And as you see, Apple convention, they always pass the actual object. And we did pass our actual object. We passed the cell, the image cell, right? Everybody recall? All right, so when the user selects this, what do we want to do? So we want to show the event. So as Greg was mentioning earlier, we want to get that event. How do we get the event? Greg says we could get the event from the selected cell or the index path. So we have an events array. On the events array, we say index path, give me your row, and that row I'll use to index into my array, and I'll get back the event. So here we got the event. Great.
So it's maybe we use the same show create event.
Yes, we need to modify it a little bit. That's where like you code as you go, you see what you need, and you modify your function. Like my function now will need some sort of parameter to take. Yes? Yes, sir? Question? Come back? Okay. Okay, so let us modify our function slightly. Our function will take an event. Our show function Let's go back to our full function. You could use the gutter here or the for quick access.
Can you go back down to
The did select.
to the
We only have the event in there. Ah, flying. We'll use a default parameter too. Very good. Where am I? Not the gutter. This is the gutter. This is called what's it called? Like jumper, I think. Code jumper. Forgot. I gotta get a technical name for you. Technical Xcode name. I'm not making up names. It's I'm not making up names. Yeah, the jumper. You jump to code here, and there's also the minimap. If you want to use the minimap, I'm not excited about the minimap. Where's the minimap? There's the minimap here. Introduced last year. It was nice when it was when it was shown, like but I probably used it like once. I mean, it's a nice thing, but it's okay. Anyway, minimap gone. I like to use this. It's fine. So what are we going to? We're going to show create event. Now this guy is gonna take in some sort of argument, a parameter. So we'll have an event here. Show create event. Event is type event. And as Amini said, we'll make the thing optional. And we'll go one step further. We'll make it a default parameter of nil. What does this do? So if I make it just optional, I'm required to pass in an argument. Everybody? If I say this is optional, whoever is calling this guy needs to pass in some value, right? They could pass in nil, right? But I don't want to force them to pass in nil. If there's not an event, I don't need to pass in anything. So what I'm gonna do is give it a default value of nil. So now 106 doesn't have to pass in anything. So this is using a default parameter. I know in Unit 1 we threw all those concepts, right? Default parameter, this. But now you could really use the tools that you have in your toolbox, right? For a use case like this. I don't want this to pass nil. This is very similar to like the completion handler. We could just omit the whole completion on a present controller, for example, because it defaults to nil. So I don't have to pass in completion nil. Right? Down here, everybody? I mean, this you could also do completion nil here, completion nil. But why write code if you don't need it? So the compiler gives you the option just not to pass it at all, because it has a default value of nil. Very similar to what we just did with our own function, defaulted to nil. Okay? So here, this guy is okay because he doesn't expect anything. This is a new event. If I click on add, I'm creating something new. I'm not updating. Awesome. Any questions about default parameters? So this is default parameters, default parameter, this guy. This guy is a default parameter. Exactly. Optional, for lack of a better word. Right? Up to the user. Yeah, we'll just present it. But yes, segue. When we click on the cell, did cell, well, we haven't finished the code for that yet. But when we click on the cell, it will present the same view. Yes. But we're not done. We have more code in there to write. Any questions about default parameters before we continue? Yes. Yeah, we have to write some more logic. Yeah, but now our function definition is good. So it accepts an event or not. Let's go to our did select here and call show. You see now we have two options here, everybody, right? We have the option to pass an event or we have the option to just not pass anything. So here we simply pass event here. Okay, so we're pretty much done with the did select part of it. Let's go to write some more logic in our show create event function. So let's jump to it. Jump to definition. Okay, so here, let's continue. So event comes in, and as Chelsea is pointing to, we need to write some if statement or something of that sort. Create event controller. Let's see. Let's jump to the create event controller. Jump to the create event controller. We have to have a variable on there as well. Create event controller, oh, we have it already. Some elf wrote it in there. Let's explain that line of code. Did I explain it? I did. It's a fancy line of code, but it's very powerful. What's happening here? Anybody want to explain to me what's happening here? What's this public private set thing do?
Public if you want to use the data outside of it, or private specifically if you want to change it within the.
Bam! See Matt for your questions about private set. Right? So what Matt says is, my event state is public outside, well, it's public for reading. It's public for reading outside of your controller, but you cannot write to it outside of this controller. Everybody with me? Right? Read only from outside. Okay? But I could change it in here. Okay? I could change it in the create event controller, but outside of the create event controller, it's only for eyes to see. Right? They cannot change it in any way. Very powerful.
Even if you're down past it.
Yeah, you just cannot change it. Okay? So what we have, what's happening there beyond the private set, we have, by default, the event is a new event. So let's see if it gets changed, because at some point it needs to change here. Any questions about that before we move on?
Yeah, the event state is.
Event state by default is a new event. Remember we have the two states. Let me go back to the event here. This is where this is coming from. In our model, in our event Swift model, we have two states. Either the view controller is in an edit state, or it's a new event. Questions? Yeah.
I know we've been over this before, but
Actually, I should probably just put that over there. You know what? Grab this code, because that only relates to the view controller. Put it in the create event controller right here, because this relates to that class. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
when we list something as public, how is it different from just it being normally?
Oh, just like var, you mean?
Yeah,
Like instead of doing this, like this.
Yes.
This is public, but I've heard where you submit code like that to an employer and you don't get through because you don't explicitly mark it public.
Okay.
And also, for a framework writer, like if you're writing a framework, like I wrote the Swift packages for you guys, you have to be explicit with everything. If you're creating a framework, you have to be explicit with everything you write. So if I'm expecting event to be public, for example, like I have the save persistence, if I'm expecting that to be public, I cannot be, oh, it's public by default. You have to explicitly mark it public.
Okay.
Cool? Even if by default it is public, you have to explicitly mark it public if you're creating a framework. But for best practices, just make it public if your intention is for it to be public. Yes? Because I just realized that this state actually just talks about this particular view controller. Like what state is the view controller in? It's not exactly on the model. The model doesn't care what state it is. But this controller wants to know what state the controller is in. Does that answer the question? Okay. All right, cool. So let's move on here. Okay. So we have the variable, that's great. Let's go back to our schedule list controller and use it. So here, what do we explain here? Create an empty view controller, we know what that is now. To do for creating an event, let's go here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so here we could say if event or if let event equal to event, that means there's an event here. That means an event was passed in to this function, right? That event would be that event. Everybody with me? Any questions, right? So this event here is an optional. I'm checking to see if it has a value. If it has a value, that means it's coming from the did select cell. Everybody? But if it doesn't have a value, that means it's coming from where? From the button, from the add button. Right? There's two states. One state, did select. That means that's an existing event. Next state, the user clicks on the add button. Let's go back. If that's why I have to stop, that's why I stop, but I want to make sure that we understand this. So here on screen, we have two events, or two states, rather. State one, the user clicks on the add button. They're creating a new event. Okay? We have an enum to capture that. The enum says new event. State two, user clicks on a cell. That's existing. Yes? So this is an existing event, correct? That's state two. Yeah.
The value changes once it is created. So like in the add button, once you press that create event, that button is where the logic will hold it changing from new event to.
We'll actually set it on the view controller we're going to let it know what your event is.
Okay, you said it there.
Exactly. Does that make sense? So when we segue over to the create event controller, we also pass it its state.
Okay.
Like, what's your state? Your state is either editing or new. Cool? Questions about state there? This is important.
So you're basically just checking to see if it's not nil.
Uh-huh.
If it's got information, you'll be editing the event, otherwise you're adding.
Exactly. Exactly. So right here in this code block, what are we saying here? If we do have an event, we will, actually we don't need to do if else actually. Is it optional? It's not optional. Is it optional? Can you check? It's optional, right? I don't think we need that line of code.
That's not optional.
I don't think we need this. We could just say create controller.event. It's optional. And then do event. We'd have to check if it's, actually, sorry. For the state we need. You see how I'm thinking here while typing? For the state, this is needed for the state. Because this here, if you come in here, then you know I need to change the state of the controller. Event state would now be, oh, we cannot change it. Somebody change that. Let me change it back for now. Actually, it doesn't matter. Keep it like that. Sorry for going back and forth here. Keep it like that. Let's not change the state of it. And then do create controller dot event gets event. Okay. Take that to do out of here. So, okay, so we're done here for now. Let's go over to our create event controller. In our create event controller, this gets set up. In our update UI, I've done the code already for this. Let's go over it. In our update UI, in the view did load, I'm checking the event. If the event exists here, so this is coming from did select. This is coming from did select row at here, and this is an existing event. Right? So if this has a value, that means it's coming from an existing event. If it's coming from an existing event, I have all the event properties already. Do we agree? Right? If I'm selecting an event that's existing, I have that event. And I pass that event over to the create event controller. Any questions? Oscar? So here I have the event. So I set the event on self. The date picker is the date picker. I set the date picker object. I set my text field value, right? I changed the label name of the button because the button was saying what before? Create event. Now, create event doesn't make sense for update, correct? So we changed that to update event, and now we changed the state, right? So we're taking care of the state here. That's why I marked it private, because I really wanted to do dependency, like full dependency injection. So that's why I was trying to make everything private there, but we'll come to that maybe next week or the week after.
What did you do in the other controller?
The only thing we set was create event controller dot event equal to event
Inside of that function?
inside of the show create event VC after the guard statement. And you could remove the to do there. Okay, so that's how we set the state here if it's existing here. If not, that means it's a new event. And if it's a new event, we give it today's date, and then we give it some empty string. And keep in mind, I'll put a to do here, by the way. Our date picker is a bit broken because right now we could create events in the past. But we'll fix that later. But know that if you're shipping something, you don't want people to create events in the past, right? I mean, maybe you do, who knows? There's some apps that allow that, just like, oh, I forgot to log something, you know? So maybe that's okay. Just leave it like that for now. But keep in mind that you could change it to force the user to create events only now and into the future. Okay? Like if it's a ticketing app, that makes sense. But if it's like a event tracking app, maybe that's okay to keep it in the future. I mean, in the past, that would probably be okay. Everybody with me on this one? Right? Yes?
So what is the point of us having the events state at this point? Because we're not switching on that. It's not, at this point, it's not really making a difference.
For now, but it could. Like if we get to a place where we want to change like a button, for example, right? We want to know what state the app is in. Okay? And then not knowing what the state your app is in or your view controller is in could lead you into really bad places really quickly. Okay? So like really capturing state early is very important.
So you're saying if we're using the same view controller for different states, I guess we should always have that?
Exactly. If you don't do that, bad things are gonna happen. You never know, you won't know what state your controller is in, something updates, you don't know what to update, and then you'll have a bunch of like if-else statements.
And if we then would be able to change our controller based on the state, like if
The UI, yeah. Maybe there might be some things you want to hide too, like some states you want to hide. Like that update UI right now could do anything. It could hide things. It could change constraints based on the state it is, right? Cool.
Just wondering if it would be easier to just, for example, if statements would be based on the state
Of the event, yes.
But we would have to be able to change that and
You would pass that through an initializer.
yeah.
Yeah, ideally, like through dependency injection, you pass in things or dependencies through initializers.
Okay.
Right now, we're passing them as variables, meaning like
Yeah.
view controller dot book equal book,
Okay.
right? And then our book needs to be public.
Okay.
But ideally, you want to pass state like in an initializer or something. Like, hey, here is your thing, create your view. Cool? All right, so update UI seems to do most of what it needs to do. Was there a question, Shania? Okay. I think we should be good to go. Let's run this. Persistence, we won't probably get to today with update, but that's okay. So if I click on the event, right? So that's good, right? Everybody sees that? So if I click on an existing event, it shows the existing event. iOS 13, thank you very much. I could just swipe down. And now if I click on the add new event, it has a blank screen. Everybody with me? So I think,
Okay, and we did that that's where the bid select row is where we.
exactly.
And in that, the bid select segues, but it doesn't actually, so, alright, so what is the logic in that?
Both of them segue.
But in bid select row.
Both of them show the view controller, but from different places.
Oh, show create, gosh.
Very good. Very, very good. Okay, I'll actually stop here because if I continue, it's just going to be a next whole lecture. Basically, what we're going to continue doing here, because right now we cannot persist. Like if I say lap time, and I do lap time, whatever, B here, and I say return, and I say update event, it does not change. Everybody with me? So So we'll work on that. That's what we'll continue tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, we'll continue on that, where I update it, it persists, and then after that, we will go into custom delegation. Okay? Cool. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
Can you go back to the schedule?
Schedule view controller.
Okay, so it's still not adding, but it's not adding new events.
No, we'll come to that tomorrow. Today I just wanted to set up the, what's your question?
Just trying to see the show event.
Show event function. That's the entire function here.
And you did the, you did the, can I see the select for,
In this select, we show create event with the event. Cool? So tomorrow, what we need to do, we'll start off with our ongoing segue, where our ongoing segue is. New event here. And we need to figure out, hey, if it's a update old event to new event, this is where we'll start off tomorrow. Right? Tomorrow, this is where we're going to start off. Question? After?
Okay, wait, no. You show what you have to do.
Did select. Yeah.
There's something on the line. I tried to put in a line.
A
And
line?
Yeah, because I missed what was in the if statement and I put it down.
What part? What part?
The if statement for the create event and show in the show create event. Yeah.
Yeah, we removed it. Because it's like redundant, because the thing is optional already. That's the power of optionals.
Yeah. Okay, but I had no.
Okay? I want to continue, but I'm not. I know where that goes. So we will continue tomorrow. Is that fair? Okay? We'll continue tomorrow. We'll update, we'll persist, and we'll do custom delegation. So be prompt, right? So we could continue, have a solid 3 hours of like lecture there. There'll be breaks in between. But we will, by the end, have our 2 tabs working with a slide to complete an event, and then that event goes to our 2nd tab. Okay? But today we did the setup of it. We saw getting an instance, actually I'm right there, getting an instance from the view controller, some dependency injection there. We injected the event in there, but it's not, again, we'll do true dependency injection using initializers. Okay, and we saw the state. So we saw a couple things, couple design patterns here, but tomorrow we'll keep working on the app in that particular state. There won't be anything changed here. It will be the same app we work on tomorrow. Okay, cool. And if you're pushing that app to GitHub, I'll probably push it and call it, actually let me push it right now. If you guys want to push together here, so I could say create get repository and give it a name, a descriptive name, for example. Create scheduler repository, public repository, and scheduler, I would call it custom delegation. Because that's like the heart of it, like passing data. Yes, we have persistence in there, but at the end of the day, we have to deal with custom delegation to update that 2nd tab. So scheduler, custom delegations, public, and scheduler app uses custom delegation to update completed events tab. To update the, okay? So that's what we headed. At the end of the day, that's what our app will do. So now you could push and then same scheduler, but different context. And now just create. Cool? Okay.